Joining us now here on The Perspective is a man by the name of Pat Boylan. Pat's the play-by-play announcer for the Indiana Fever, also a sideline reporter with the Indiana Pacers on Fox Sports Indiana. Pat, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, I appreciate you having me.
So you're, of course, with Fox Sports Indiana. Where did your passion for broadcasting originally come from?
Probably came from when I was pretty young. I want to say like middle school age. And growing up in Indianapolis, had just the incredible fortune of we had some of the best play-by-play announcers of anywhere in our city. And I grew up listening to somebody that I now get to work with, Mark Boyle, on the Pacers. At the time, Bob Lamey was really in his prime with the Colts. And Kristen Airy, who now is Pacers television, at the time was Butler basketball radio. And I just remember being fascinated by the fact that I could turn on the radio, listen to those guys call a game, and they could place an image in my head that almost felt like I was there or watching it on television. And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, to be able to combine sports and my love for sports with the ability to explain everything that's happening on the floor or on the field to an audience. And so, I went to Carmel High School in Indianapolis and went to Ball State, and was fortunate that both of those schools had a lot of opportunities for a young broadcaster to, kind of get his feet wet in the industry before going out into the real world.
So you're with the Pacers and also with the Indiana Fever. How did you originally get involved with that group?
Well, so when I was right out of college, I went to Bismarck, North Dakota. Everybody in the broadcast industry typically has to pay their dues somewhere. And for me, that was in Bismarck. It's as cold as it sounds. But it was a great job. I love my time there. It was doing television play-by-play, about 70 games a year for colleges and high schools in the North Dakota area. And one thing that I loved about it was the schedule was 70 or so games. It was September to late March. It more or less mimicked pretty closely an NBA season. And we were traveling by car, by truck to all these different areas throughout North Dakota. And I just remember thinking, well, this is similar to the grind of an NBA year. It's tough to get television play-by-play reps. This is, what I feel like will be a good opportunity for me. And when I was there for almost exactly a year, I still remember getting a call from Kristen Airy, who has been a long-time mentor of mine, and Kevin Lee, who those in Indianapolis, if they're sports fans, might know. He had my job previous to me, but he also was with the Colts. He also does a ton with IndyCar. He was getting another opportunity to do some more stuff with the NFL, and it essentially made him unable to continue to do this. Kristen Airy put my foot in the door, and then our boss, Jamie Burns, who is the vice president of broadcasting with the Pacers, but he's also the director on the TV broadcast. He, I'm sure, had a lot of applicants that had resumes that were longer and more impressive than mine, but he believed in me as really a kid that wasn't too far out of college at the time. And that was in 2014, 2015 Pacers season. So for chronology, I came in to the Pacers about a month after Paul George had that terrible leg break in Vegas before the Olympics. And that was my first year there. So it's kind of hard to believe I'm through 7 Pacers seasons and currently in the midst of my 7th Fever season.
So you've done broadcasting both on the radio and on television. What's your favorite aspect of what you do?
Well, so what I've always had a passion for, and what I still continue to hope to do at an even higher level than, the great opportunities I've been given so far, is play-by-play. And I love radio and I love TV. They're both very different. They might not seem that different, but if you're in the industry and you're in the medium, just like I'm sure aspects are in many different industries and many different careers, it's a fairly different game to call. So on radio, you're calling every little thing that you can point out because the person listening can't see. So they need every little bit of description that you can give them. On television, it can kind of be a bit more of a less is more type approach. You are captioning what they can already see. So you are finding the most important things to talk about and the most important moments to speak, and you're letting your color analyst do a bit more work. So they're both different mediums, but I have passion for both of them. And what I'm so fortunate about with my opportunity here is I get to be the play-by-play announcer for the Fever and in the WNBA. And I've gotten the opportunity to do that for 7 years and for 4 seasons. Getting to be the guy. I kind of shared the duties with Chris Denary my first 3 seasons in Indy. And then on the Pacers side, while I'm not the play-by-play announcer, I get to be a part of a team that has so many talented and really, frankly, legendary broadcasters. I'm talking Mark Boyle, of course, Chris Denary, but also Quinn Buckner, Jeremiah Johnson, the late Slick Leonard, Eddie Gill. To be a part of that team is really humbling. And I've had the opportunity as well. There's been a couple games that Mark couldn't do on the radio. There's been a couple games that Chris couldn't do on TV where I've gotten to fill in for them and gotten to do Pacers play-by-play on both radio and on television a couple of times. So I just feel extremely fortunate that I get to do both of those things. And because of when the WNBA season runs, it's essentially, it changes every year, but something like mid-May to mid-September, that means basketball really doesn't stop for me. When the Pacers season's coming to a close, the WNBA season's starting up. When the W season's coming to a close, the Pacers season's starting up. And if either of those teams have some success in the playoffs, oftentimes there's some overlap in those schedules as well. So for a basketball and a broadcast junkie, getting to work for those two teams in what essentially amounts to almost 12 straight months of basketball really is something that I feel extremely fortunate about.
So you mentioned Chris Denary as well as Eddie Gill, Jeremiah Johnson, and the late Slick Leonard, as people that you've been fortunate enough to work with. Do you have, or did you have some sort of a mentor to you, not before Chris Denary that was kind of, helped you get your foot in the door?
I didn't have one before Chris Denary because Chris Denary has been my mentor as long as I can remember. Chris moved into the neighborhood that I grew up in when I was probably 10 or so. And I have 2 younger brothers. He has 3 sons, and we're all in the similar ballpark and age range. And so my middle brother played basketball with his middle son, and I've gotten to know the Denarys from a very young age. I walk to their house from my house. And so that was when Chris was at Butler doing Butler basketball, and I shadowed him when I was in 6th grade at a Butler game. And I remember sitting there courtside with him as he called the action back and forth and just being amazed that this was a real job that Chris got to do. I had always been so fascinated by listening to those guys, but really it wasn't until I sat courtside with Chris and had the action in my ears and got to listen to him call the game that it really cemented that this would be a passion for me. And so Chris has been somebody that I've kind of been like a dog on a leash in terms of I followed him around and been bugging him for lunch when I was in high school and in college. I would try to drive down a few times a year to get lunch or dinner with Chris. And, fortunately, he saw something in me that made him feel like I was capable of doing this job. And that's so important, I think, in this industry, not only to have a mentor, but somebody that not only will spend time with you and give you guidance, but someone that genuinely believes in your abilities and your career. And I owe a ton of where I am both as a broadcaster and in my career to Chris. And since I have gotten with the Pacers, I've been fortunate to forge a couple more of those. Jamie, my boss, who I mentioned, is somebody that certainly is a coach for me, somebody that I look up to that's been in this industry for a very long time and done what he does at a director level for the broadcast for a very long time. And then Mark Boylan, somebody that I've gotten really close with over the last 7 years since I've gotten to work here. And Mark and Chris are both very talented broadcasters, but one thing that is just kind of a fascinating dynamic for me, they're both extremely good people. They both extremely have a passion for helping younger people. They got a leg up through help when they were, in their younger careers. And they both very much are passionate about giving back to the younger broadcaster. They're both very talented broadcasters. Outside of those 2 things, there's not a whole lot that they have in common. Mark and Chris are very, very different people and view the world in a very different way. and both in very positive aspects. They're just very different individuals. And so it's been fascinating for me. It's been extremely helpful for me to get to be as close as I am with both of those two and get to view, the broadcast and the world in general from a couple of fairly different lenses.
And I think that's really important to have that sort of mentorship to me. And those of you listening in the Dayton area, that mentor to me has been Shay Neal, who's who's about to graduate from Wright State. But I think what you're saying, Pat, is really important to getting a leg up in that. But you're a Ball State grad, and what was some of the things at Ball State that helped you kind of was there a learning curve when you had your first broadcasts, or was it kind of something that you struggled with early on?
I'm not sure if there was a learning curve, but the one piece of advice I give to anybody that wants to go into broadcasting, whether it's radio, whether it's television, I mean, heck, even if it's journalism, whether it's the written word, you have to find a school that's going to give you the opportunity to get those reps while you're in school. Now, there's a lot of different colleges that have a lot of different communications programs, but if where you are going does not give you the opportunity to get a bunch of reps as a college student, the book study in this field, it just only can take you so far. It's valuable. Having a degree is valuable. I learned stuff from those classes that I wouldn't have otherwise learned. But I would say 80 to 90% of what you need to learn as an up and coming broadcaster from college is the ability to be able to do it. And when I was at Carmel, I got 3 years of calling play-by-play on the radio for Carmel Athletics. When I was at Ball State, I got what I would say is like 3.5 years of experience doing play-by-play my freshman year. You can't really call Ball State sports your freshman year, at least at Ball State when I was there, because they already pick a lot of those teams the year before when you're still in your senior year of high school. But they do allow you, at the time they did at least, I'm sure they do now, the ability to go call high school games in the area. So I did some of that my freshman year. And then moved in as the play-by-play announcer for Ball State football, the student announcer, my sophomore year. And so what that really gave me is when I got to that job in Bismarck, it was my first job. It was a very new experience. It was the first time anyone was ever paying me to do anything, I think. Maybe I had a couple of small paying gigs here or there, but it was the first time anyone was paying me anything of substance to do anything in broadcasting. But I felt like it was year 8 for me because I had been doing this since my sophomore year at Carmel High School. And I think that is what helped me the most. Is I felt like when I got to Ball State, I was in year 4, and a lot of kids around me were in year 1. They weren't as lucky as I was to go to a high school that had as many opportunities as it did. And so, they were trying to hit the ground running, never really working for a student station before, where I had 3 years of experience doing that. And then when I got into the first gig in the real world, I kind of felt like I was in year 8, where there were some other people who felt like they were more like year 2, 3, 4, whatever. So I felt like that, almost base of the pyramid of education and learning when I was young was so vital, because I didn't feel there were so many new experiences in that first job that definitely made me feel new to the broadcast world. But in a lot of ways, it was just, okay, do what you've been doing the last 7 years, just do it in Bismarck, North Dakota. And now, you have a paycheck to live up to. So
to this point, I know this is a very tough question, and I've asked this of all the guests we've had on. What are some of your favorite moments over the course of your career?
Well, I think for me, my favorite moments have been the opportunity to step into the big chair, if you will, with the Pacers. As I mentioned, I'm so fortunate to get to work in the WNBA and with the Fever. It's a remarkable organization. It's a remarkable league. I will be a WNBA fan for the rest of my life, whether or not I have the opportunity to work in the WNBA. It's something I take so much pride in. I think it's so important. But the opportunity to step in and do NBA play-by-play, when I was going into my second year with the Pacers, I was 25, 26. Mark was getting an award. Mark Boyle was getting an award for something he had done in the community, and he wasn't able to make a preseason game. If it was a regular season game, he probably would have skipped the award ceremony. But since it was a preseason game, he wanted to go to it. Our bosses cleared it off. It was just, again, it was just a preseason game, but it was the opportunity as a 25, 26-year-old, I can't remember exactly how old I was, to call NBA a dream of mine. And, I will never forget what it felt like to sit in that chair, put on that headset, get to call that game. A couple of years later, Kristen Airy, his son was getting married, and there was a game he couldn't do. Ended up being a game in Chicago against the Bulls, where I filled in for him on TV. So that was my first experience getting to do the Pacers on television. And that's still, a lot of people, when I'm doing interviews, they talk about, how you've made it to this point. And don't get me wrong, I take a lot of pride and passion in where I am right now. But in a lot of ways, in more ways than not, I'm still somebody that's on the ladder that is still trying to climb it. I want to be an NBA play-by-play announcer. And so those opportunities to step in there have just been, wow moments. And it was then a couple of years later where, unfortunately, Chris got a kidney stone the morning before a game in New York. And they called me up, said, "Hey, we think we're going to need you. We're going to have you on a plane in 90 minutes. You need to catch it to New York." I woke up that morning thinking I wasn't doing a whole lot that day, except for getting ready for the game as the host and sideline reporter on the radio broadcast. Next thing I knew, I was in the Garden sitting courtside with Clyde Frazier to my left and Quinn Buckner on my right, calling this game. I mean, I still laugh when I tell the story. It's been almost 2 years, and it's still so ridiculous and so surreal of a moment that, it's something I'll never forget. And then, unfortunately, Mark was in a scenario where he was contact traced with COVID. He never actually caught it, but he was in a contact tracing scenario that took him out of a couple games this past season, and I got to fill in for him. And so I think I've had so much good fortune and so many great opportunities in this industry and with the Pacers and with the Fever, Pacers Sports and Entertainment. But it's those moments when, I've gotten to taste the type of job that ultimately I aspire to be able to do one day full time. Those from a personal perspective stand out to me.
Pat, I can't thank you enough for your time. Great stuff from you today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Appreciate you having me on.